It's a very special part of the ceremony and a very great privilege for me to introduce our convocation speaker today, Bob Schieffer. Now, you may think it's a bit cheeky of me to introduce such a distinguished speaker so informally, but as Bob explains to us in his memoirs, it really is Bob and not Robert. Bob Schieffer's remarkable career is well known to everyone here. During his professional journey from a local crime reporter to a national icon, he has been a first-hand witness to most of the major stories of our time, from James Meredith's integration of the University of Mississippi, to Vietnam, to every president since President Nixon. He is one of the few journalists to have covered every major beat in Washington: the White House, Congress, the Pentagon, and the State Department. And as anchor of Face the Nation, he has probed the thinking of virtually every important newsmaker of our generation. It's particularly fitting to have Bob here at the LBJ School for many reasons. First, of course, Bob is a Texan and was born in Austin. Even more important, LBJ himself played a role in setting Bob on the remarkable path he has traveled. As Bob recounts in his book, This Just In, "From the day I saw Johnson, I was hooked on politics." But perhaps the most important reason for having Bob here today is that he's the proud father of an LBJ grad, Susan Schieffer, and father-in-law of another LBJ grad, Susan's husband, Steve. Bob is not only a great journalist, but an important voice in our national conscience. He has become well known for his commentaries every Sunday at the end of Face the Nation. One of his most famous commentaries came on the eve of the 2000 presidential election, which ended with the memorable phrases, "So go vote. It's good for the country and good for you. Makes you feel big and strong." Shortly after 9/11, Bob gave a commentary proposing a year of mandatory public service for every American at age 18. He reflected on his own military service in the Air Force ROTC, which he chose in face of the draft. In his commentary, he said, and I quote, "We need to find a way to bring young people from every strata of America together." The draft did that. It helped us to know each other and to know the pride that only comes when we feel we've been part of making something better. I don't know if the country benefited from my small service, but I sure did. It's hard to imagine a more eloquent statement of the importance of public service, which has brought us all here together today. Now, most of you would think that this is a record of accomplishment that was enough for one man in a lifetime. But Bob isn't content with just being the leading correspondent of our time. He's also become a renowned singer and songwriter, partnering with the group Honky Tonk Confidential to produce a CD entitled Roadkill Stew and Other News. Now, who would have thought that this quintessential voice of probity would author a song entitled Little Lulu and Her Sister Hot Stuff? In his new career, Bob wrote a song called TV Anchorman. In that song, he describes a path to success, and I'm quoting the lyrics, "You don't have to know all that much, like names and dates and facts and such, because you've got a face that reeks sincerity." Well, unfortunately, that may describe many people on TV today, but it sure doesn't describe Bob Schieffer. Bob's work is in the best tradition of public service and an uncompromising commitment to truth and integrity, values that are at the heart of our work here at the LBJ School, and an example that our graduates here today would do well to emulate. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Bob Schieffer.
Thank you all so much. Allison, I just want to say to you, that was a real treat. You know, in the neighborhood where I grew up, you were considered an intellectual if you could listen to the William Tell Overture and not think of the Lone Ranger. That was our test. And I was just kind of thinking as I was listening to you make that talk, was there a poem that I could think of, that I remember, that I could stand before a group? And the only poem that came to my mind, which I learned this when I was a student at TCU, went something like this, and maybe it's appropriate because of where we are. It was a poem that said, let's all go down to Austin, Texas, where they have the artificial moonlight, where the cowboys and cowgirls dance to the broad daylight, where every cowboy's a champion, every Indian's a chief. It ain't that old pearl beer from a tap on the wall. That ain't all. They'll go from a day or two till you can't tell the rodeo contestants from the fighting crew in Austin, Texas. It is such an honor for me to be here. I grew up in Fort Worth, but I was born just down the road here at Breckenridge Hospital. My mother and father both grew up in Austin during the Great Depression. My father's family had a dairy farm out where the old Austin airport is now. And my mother grew up down just off 6th Street, and her father was a teamster. And the only way that they could exist, because her father had lost his job, her brother quit school in the 6th grade, and they existed on what he brought home every evening. Their great desire was to go to college, but of course they couldn't. But they vowed that someday their children would have the opportunity that they never did to go to college. And so it was a great moment in my mother's life when I became the first person on either side of our family to graduate from college. And then my sister graduated, later my brother, who got 2 degrees here, and then one day her granddaughter, who graduated, who sat where you sit here at the LBJ school. We were all here when the LBJ school was dedicated in 1971, and I have a wonderful picture of my daughter, who was a baby, a toddler, sitting out by the pool out there. And when she graduated that day, we took another picture of her in her cap and gown and her blue hood, just like you all are, in the same place. Last Sunday, my brother's son graduated from St. Mark's College in Annapolis, Maryland, which means that not only did all of my mother's children graduate from college, but so did all of her grandchildren. And that's why this is such a meaningful thing for me to be here today. And I want to tell you something else. You are all filled with joy, but you will never know the joy that your parents feel today until you someday sit where they sit. So there is a happier day ahead for each and every one of you. I want to talk to you today about 2 things, about the state of our politics today. Frankly, I think it has gone off track. And then I want to talk to you about what I think America's first line of defense is in this age of terrorism. As Jim said, the first politician I ever saw was Lyndon Johnson. The year was 1948. I was 10 years old. Dewey was running against Truman, and in Texas, Lyndon Johnson, Congressman Lyndon Johnson, was running for the United States Senate. It was big news in our neighborhood because we heard that he was coming to make a campaign stop, and it would be at the very vacant lot where we all played baseball on the northwest corner of Fort Worth. And so we all went down to see him. It was a big thing in the neighborhood, and the reason we were all so excited about it was we heard he was coming in a helicopter, and we had never seen a helicopter. And so there we all were, and up in the sky all at once, here's this airplane with no wings on it, and then over this electronic bullhorn, "This is your candidate for the United States Senate, Lyndon B. Johnson. I'll be down to..." Well, at that moment, we knew exactly how Moses felt when he realized the burning bush was talking to him. We didn't know if it was Lyndon Johnson. We didn't know it was God. We didn't know what it was. We were just terrified. And then this helicopter lands. It was this huge cloud of dust. Lyndon Johnson got out. He was wearing a big Stetson hat. He made this rousing speech. And then at the end of the speech, he just stood back and threw his hat out into the crowd, waved goodbye, got on the helicopter, and flew off into the midday face on. My God, we'd never seen anything like this in my life. I later told this story to Jake Pickle, the longtime congressman from Austin, and Jake said, "Oh yeah, that was my job in the campaign." And I said, "What was it?" He said, "I was the hat catcher." I said, "What do you mean the hat catcher?" He said, "Let me tell you something. Lyndon Johnson was the tightest man on the face of the earth." He said he wasn't going to waste a hat on a political rally. So he said it was my job to drive to wherever that helicopter was coming, get on the front row. When Johnson saw me, he'd throw that hat to me, then I'd run around behind the helicopter, give it to him, and they'd fly off to the next stop. I love to tell that story, not because it's just the story I love to hear, but because it underlines the contrast between the politics of that day and the politics of today. Today, the candidates, because they are trying to reach so many people and can do it so much more efficiently on television, seldom go into the communities. They simply buy television ads and run the television ads. The great advantage of Lyndon Johnson coming to our community that day was not only did we get to see Lyndon Johnson, but he got to see us. He got to see who lived in that neighborhood. Today, if a candidate wants to know who his constituents are, he simply hires a pollster. He hires a consultant. They use computers. They run a printout that can tell you how many people make this much. How many people work at the bomber plant? How many people work at another job? All of it now is done by professionals, because that's what we have done. We have taken what used to be an amateur sport and turned it into a professional business, with the purpose now sometimes to be as much to show a profit for the cottage industries that have grown up around campaigns as to who wins or loses. And my friends, I think we are the worst for that. I think that when we took the campaigns out of the communities and put them on television, we changed everything. When we turned this into a professional business, we created one of the nastiest, dirtiest, and most offensive kinds of situations that we could have. Here is the reason why. When Lyndon Johnson came to our community, the people that were his advisors, the people that were running his campaign in the northwest part of Fort Worth were people who lived in the community, and they had a stake in it. They worked at the bank, or they worked out at the bomber plant, or they worked at the hardware store, or they worked at the grocery store. They had real jobs. And so it was that when their candidate won, they were able to share in the joy. But when the candidate lost, they had to go back into the community where they lived and live with that loss. Now, when the professional consultant runs the campaign, he doesn't have to go back to the community and live with that loss. He simply collects his money and goes on to the next campaign. And that, my friends, is the reason we have the dirty politics that we have today. If an alien somehow landed on planet Earth and all he knew about our politics and the people who ran for office in this country was what he saw in television commercials, he would come to no other conclusion but that the candidates of our time are either deviants, liars, thieves, or any other kind of ungodly person. Because if you listen to the television commercial, you'll never hear a nice word said about anything. One of the leading political consultants told me once in an interview that he always began every campaign year by rereading Machiavelli. You will remember Machiavelli, who said that the ends always justify the means. As those of you who go into public life and go into public policy and go to work in politics, I hope instead that you will read Gandhi, who said that the ends reflect the means. The ends reflect the means. The difference in those 2 points of view are the difference in night and day in our politics of today.
The atmosphere of nastiness, partisanship, the unwillingness to compromise, the resulting inability of government that we see today comes directly and is reflected by the way that our candidates came to office. Finding the things that drive us apart does work in the short term, but it must never be allowed to triumph over the search for things that bring us together. Lyndon Johnson said, "Let us reason together," and that is still the best advice and the most successful political strategy. Our politics should be about arguments, not about destroying those who oppose us. As you prepare for your careers in politics, I ask you only to reflect on that as you decide what you want our political system to be. Democracies, it has been said, deserve the political system and the elected officials that they get. Frankly, I think we deserve better than the current system is providing us. I think we can do better. I think we should do better. I think, frankly, we have to do better. The second thing I would ask you to reflect on today is this question: how did America get to be America? Let us say in the beginning, it was not because those who came here feared the future or wanted to limit political discourse or put limits on the exploration of the unknown, either geographically or in the fields of science. Nor was it because we decided it was somehow unpatriotic to criticize the government of the moment. Where did that come from? To the contrary, our strengths have always been just the opposite. Our willingness to challenge conventional thought, our curiosity, and the desire to challenge the unknown to find a better life for our children. Throughout our history, that drive has always been the force that created the kind of government that we have had, and in the most crucial times, the government that reflected the public will.
What people think of America, what they believe we think of ourselves, what they conclude we are willing to fight for, has more to do with our own security than any weapon in our arsenal. It seems to me that if we have learned anything in the past 30 years, it is that democracy cannot be imposed from without. It must grow from within. From Vietnam to Iraq, we have learned that we can help others, but we can't do it for them. America's best chance to influence events is to lead by example, to demonstrate why our system works, and to do that, we must always practice what we preach. Nor can we do very much alone. Our history tells us that America does best when it works with others, not when we try to work alone. We must seek out and find those who share our values and work together with them. We're told we're in a worldwide war against terrorism, and I believe that is true. But we will not defeat terrorists by adopting their methods. Our most effective weapon in this ideological war is to show how different we are from those who hate and oppose us. And perhaps the greatest difference of all is the optimism that has always marked the American people. We believe that with effort there can always be a better way. And how could we, as a people, be otherwise? We are not, as Edward R. Murrow once said, descended from fearful people. Had Americans not been optimists, would they have gotten in those little boats and come across the Atlantic Ocean not knowing what was on the other side? Had they not been optimists, would they have gotten into those covered wagons and gone across those mountains with no idea of what was on the other side of the mountains, except there was the possibility of a better way of life for their children? That was the legacy that those people handed down to my parents, that they passed on to me, and that I hope you will pass on to your kids. We did not get to the place where America finds itself today because those who came before us were timid or afraid to hold their ideas up to public scrutiny or point out wrongs that should be righted. Sometimes I wonder if some of us have forgotten that. I leave you today with this thought. Throughout history, people have generally sorted themselves into three groups. Those who had no interest in what was on the other side of the mountain, those who feared what was on the other side of the mountain, and those who wanted to go to the other side of the mountain to see what was there. You will decide which of those groups to join. You will decide in which of those groups you will be most comfortable. I can't tell you which group to join, but I hope you will make the trip. I can't tell you what's on the other side of the mountain, but I can tell you going there is the American way. Good luck to you. Thank you. God bless.